Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're at on this great planet. Thank you for joining us today. We're excited about this talk. This is we're going to have a whole bunch of kind of like customer talks or use case talks or just people in the open source community who are using Temporal, just talk about how they're using it and some of the tips and tricks that they've had along the way of doing this. So hopefully this is something that I think will be really, really helpful for y'all as we go forward. So, guys, so just before we start, so if y'all haven't heard of Dubber, I know Yaku will give a little bit of an overview of the company and what it does. But some really interesting usage of Temporal and kind of how they got exposed to Temporal and how they're using it is what we're going to actually walk through today. If you're not familiar with Dubber, go check them out. It's I guess, kind of I don't know. You guys are about 12 or 13 years old now, right, Matt? Isn't that? I mean, you guys have been around for a little bit of time, correct?
Yeah, that'd be about right. Yep.
Yeah. In Melbourne, as I remember, as we were talking, right? So
I think we
Australian
started off
company.
we started off in Melbourne, but now we've got offices in Sydney and Brisbane, also in the UK.
Cool. All right. So, guys, if you want to take it away, that'd be great. Thank you. Thanks for doing this today.
Okay, awesome. Thanks. Sorry, I lost my audio for a little bit there. So,
We dealt with it, buddy. We're good. We can hear you
perfect.
great.
That's why we got the experts on the call. All right. So, yeah, we're going to talk for 30 minutes. Q&A. You guys probably said that, but I didn't hear it. All right. So, welcome to Temporal at Dubber. As Jim introed, my name's Yaku, and yeah, you've heard a little bit from Matt already. So Matt and I are on the AI team at Dubber. So our key responsibilities are coming up with new algorithms and implementing those on top of call recordings. And the other big responsibility is doing inference at scale. So Dubber operates at a very significant scale. And that's the problem we're going to be talking about today and what Temporal helps us with. Okay, but before we get into that, I want to give you a little bit of a background on myself. So in 2018, I joined a little fledgling startup in Brisbane as a founding engineer. The startup was called Notive. So Notive was an AI meeting assistant back before AI was cool. So Notive would join Zoom calls similar to this one, get a recording of the call, and then we would do some AI on it. So back in 2018, we were doing things like finding your action items, breaking the call up into chapters, finding interesting keywords and topics within each of the chapters, and building a diarization model, which would tell you who was speaking when. So the reason we built all this cool tech was, as a startup, our number one priority was getting to product market fit. And this made us a juicy acquisition target for a little company called Dubber. So Dubber acquired Notive in early 2022, and basically the whole AI team joined up with the AI team at Dubber and quickly realized, we had to pivot from get to product market fit to get to inference at scale. So we did a whole bunch of digging, look at all the different options, and we finally settled on Temporal as our strategy for getting to inference at scale. All right, so the rest of the talk is going to be about a little bit about Dubber, who we are, what we do, show you our sort of key product that's based on AI, and then Matt's going to talk about Temporal at Dubber, and we'll have a bit of Q&A. If there's any questions that come up in between, I'll answer that in the in-between section. All right, so who's Dubber? So if you look up the top here, you probably recognize some of these names. If you're in Canada, maybe you recognize Bell. In the States, AT&T. Obviously, things like Zoom, and in Australia, if you're from Australia, maybe you recognize Telstra. So Dubber connects into the big service providers around the world for telecommunications. Through these connections, customers can turn on Dubber's offerings, and then we basically start getting recordings of their calls. Mainly it's for compliance, but there's been a shift from compliance into these new AI capabilities we're offering. So we refer to them as the Dubber moments, and those moments are pieces of points in a call where something interesting happens. So the types of moments we have are complaints. We do abuse detection, sales close. So this one's really useful for small businesses that are trying to understand like what sales interactions are happening on their phone calls, call summaries, and action items. So a little bit more context, because as you can imagine, phone call data is quite sensitive. Everyone wants to have their data, and with GDPR, data needs to be locally located. So because of that, we're deployed all around the world, 8 locations, and Temporal's made this really easy for us. So basically, each one of these becomes a different Temporal namespace, and yeah, it really makes that part of the job easy. So this is a little bit of a marketing fluff slide, but it comes straight from our investor deck. What I want to highlight is basically what we're talking about today is not a small piece of Dubber. It's what Dubber sees as the future and what's an increasing part of our revenue. And that's about all. Okay, so let's have a look at Dubber moments. Before we get into that, I'll talk a little bit through the architecture. So this is you over here, and you're having your phone call with whoever you're talking to. Maybe you're a small business and you answer your phone line. We ingest that recording of that phone call. Kafka bus creates an event that says recording created, and then we'll start a workflow for this new recording. That start workflow event goes to Temporal Cloud. Sorry. The Temporal Cloud then talks to what's called our workflow worker. So for those of you who don't know, the workflow worker in Temporal basically contains your orchestration code. That orchestration code will say things like, hey, if it's this type of workflow, these are the sets of activities you want to run. So generally for our workflows, we'll always start with the media activity. That'll do some analysis, like is this a video recording, an audio recording, extract just the audio, things like that. And then that might go to like our transcription activity. And finally, down here is like moment activity, moment summary workers. So the workflow worker is specifying which of these we want to use. We use an artifact store pattern that Matt will talk about a little bit later. So none of the actual outputs from any of our workers actually go to Temporal. We're only passing references back to Temporal up here. The rest of the data ends up in the artifact store. All right, happy to take any questions about this later as well. And so, yeah, I'll play the little demo we've got now and then talk through it some more.
Good morning, Sydney Orange Store. How can I help you?
Hey, yeah, I'm just looking for the orange iWatch. I saw there's a new model out. I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit about the details.
Absolutely. We've got the Orange Model 17 available for $2,100 and also the Orange Model 18 at $2,900.
Ah, okay. Well, what's the difference between the two?
Well, the newer model is now including a band.
Oh, wow. Well, I only go with the latest and greatest, so I'm going to have to go with that new model, the 18. Yeah, if you could lock that in, that'd be great.
Okay, great. We've got you locked in. That'll be delivered to you within the next 9 months.
9 months? You having a laugh? Oh, that's a bit ridiculous. I'm going to have to cancel. I might go order it from another store.
Oh, sir, please don't pass up this amazing opportunity to get a hold of one of these watches.
Yeah, no, I think I'm going to give it a miss. I'll talk to you later. So yeah, you'll have to excuse Matt and my's excellent acting skills, but hopefully you get
Yaku,
Yep.
the sales job there by the salesman was just tremendous. I got to tell you, I was sold.
Love it. All right, so we put this recording that you just saw there through our system, and this is the sort of stuff you're getting out. So it's the call summary. So customer calls the Sydney Orange store for the new iWatch, but yeah, it's not interested because 9 months is a bit too ridiculous. And then you get the moments that came through. So it detected that there was a complaint. Customer was suspecting delivery with a reasonable time frame, but it took 9 months. But sorry, I was told it would take 9 months. And then there's the salesy type moment. So there was an offer for 2 different models of the iWatch, and it's identified an upsell. The customers offered a more expensive model by highlighting the additional feature being the band. So yeah, a little bit of a play on how nobody is bringing out any new features. Finally, what we allow you to see is how this stuff is changing over time. So maybe if you see a particular type of complaint on a particular day, you can click into that and dig into trying to understand what's actually going on. All right, and now I'll hand over to Matt to do his part.
Yeah, and Yaku, there were a couple of questions, but I think they're a little bit more applicable to what Matt's going to go through. I think some of the stuff that was asked, Matt, you're gonna talk to some of it, I think. So we'll do some questions at the end of Matt's session as well, guys. So thanks, Matt.
Hi everyone, my name's Matt Gurney. I'm a software engineer at Dubber. I guess that's what I do. I've been building systems for 30 years. I'm still hands-on because I love coding, and I think Dubber's doing some amazing stuff. So I'm excited to be part of that. A lot of my history is in large-scale systems integration, so either between different organizations, or maybe within an organization linking different systems together. And that's going back quite a long way. So using some older patterns like asynchronous middleware or JMS, WebCRMQ, TIBCO Rendezvous, TIBCO MS, products like this. So I guess that's just sort of where I'm coming from in my background. Recently, I've done a master's in data science, and so I'm getting more into the AI space. So I'll just tell you more about how we're using Temporal at Dubber, just giving you some hard numbers. So we've been using it for 2 years. You can see that we've got it in 3 regions, APAC, NA, and EMEA. In terms of temporal cloud instances, we've got, or namespaces as they're called, we've got 12, which is 8 in production and 4 in non-prod. So, as Yaku's alluded to, that's all around the data jurisdiction. We have to keep the customer's data in their region. So therefore we have those distributed production environments. Temporal supports lots of languages. The particular SDK languages that we use are Python, because we've got all this AI stuff we're doing, Go, and .NET. We've got 11 different workflow definitions. So they're effectively sort of business functions that we're orchestrating via Temporal. And those workflows are using about 30 or 40 different types of activities. An example of an activity could be something that Yaku showed earlier, for example, a media analysis activity that looks at a call and determines its duration. The most activities in a single workflow is about 20, and the least is just 1. Okay, so I talk about some implementation decisions. I guess these could be applicable to other people considering Temporal, or even if you are already using Temporal, you could think about these things. I think one of the first ones is, do you use the Temporal cloud or not? So Temporal gives you the option to self-host, or you can use their hosted offering. So we went for the hosted offering, and that was because it was just it's just turnkey solution. It's available effectively instantaneously, and we don't have to have that burden of supporting the various software components that make up the Temporal instance. So that's the approach we went for there. We went for this artifact store pattern, and that's something that Yaku mentioned on that earlier architectural diagram. So when we think about a temporal workflow, it's a sequence of activities that will be executed in order. And then we're passing data payloads between those activities. Now, in our case, some of those payloads are very large, like a long video call. We don't really want to pass all of that data payload through Temporal. What we just pass via Temporal is just IDs or pointers or references or links effectively to those objects. And the objects themselves live inside a separate repository, which is this artifact store. That gives us that advantage of less data is going across the wire. We're putting less load on the temporal system, but also we've got improved security because we're not sharing that data outside our environment. The separate workers, this is an option. You can choose to go either way. In the temporal world, we talk about, firstly, we have this concept of the workflows, of course, and the activities. But when it comes to at runtime, you're running a workflow worker or an activity worker. Now, they can be packaged, if you want, inside the same, effectively, OS process, or you could have separate OS processes that represent only running orchestration tasks and only running activity tasks. We chose to have separate workers, some just doing the orchestration or the workflows, and some doing the activities, because they've got effectively a different performance profile, and it just made more sense to us to separate them out so we could manage them slightly differently. When we started with Temporal, which was more than 2 years ago, Temporal didn't have a native Python SDK available. But given the AI work that we're doing, we needed Python capability. So we came up with this pattern, which is the Go Python bridge. And what that is a mechanism that allowed us to still use Temporal to initiate activities that are running inside Python. But how we did that was via using a Go temporal client and then using a gRPC client and server to trigger Python. Now that's no longer applicable because, of course, there is now a native Python SDK which we're using, but maybe this is applicable if there's some other language out there that you want to use and there isn't currently a temporal SDK available for that. You could consider a similar pattern. When we think about our temporal workflows, as I mentioned earlier, you're passing these data payloads in and out of the activities, and you can choose what structure you want to use or what format. And so we've gone for protobuf because it's compact. It has the capability. It also satisfies we can compile it into the multiple languages, and it's also backwards compatible when we make changes. So that works well, and it just fits well with the temporal. Activity retry classes. So at the heart of Temporal, when you think about why you use it, a key aspect is the idea of, I guess, Temporal accepts that activities could fail for various reasons, and Temporal is there to help you resolve that and to retry them and to handle that recovery. But that means that you need to define for each of your activities what behavior you want for its recovery or retrying. How long should you retry? How long should you wait? How long should you wait between retries? What's the total time you should wait? Now, that's a whole bunch of numeric settings that you could individually apply to each activity, or maybe it turns out that you want to sort of invent some named classes of behavior. Like we've got some activities that are quick and cheap, and others that take a long time and they're expensive. A long time expensive could be something that, for example, extracts a transcription out of a long video file. So what we do is we create named classes that abstract away those numeric settings, and that allows the developers to consistently apply that class to one of the activities to get one of the known retry behaviors that we're trying to achieve. So some of the advantages, these are just some of the key ones that come to mind. The separation of concerns for me is a big one. When we think about software systems, over time, as they grow, when we add more capabilities in, they get confused and complex. That's just the nature of software. One of the ways we try to resolve that architecturally in IT, and we always have, is this separation of concerns concept, where we say, look, this layer is going to be responsible for this concern or responsibility, and other layers do other things. So once you bring in a temporal style approach, you're saying, look, this is my orchestration layer, and it provides these orchestration services. They will be done here, they won't be done elsewhere. These are my activities. They do nothing but perform the activity task. Now, you can do that no matter what you're coding in. But the reality is that when you have a product that helps to define that separation, I think you end up with better adherence to that architecture, which is a better overall outcome. Scalability. These are one of the key reasons why people would use something like Temporal. As Yaku suggested earlier, we need to be able to scale out to cover a lot of calls. We can be very confident that we know that Temporal is doing some absurdly massive numbers with other clients, so that even as Dubber grows, we know that we're very confident that Temporal will be able to scale out and won't be a bottleneck or a risk to our customers. Resilience, again, this is one of these key ideas of why would you use Temporal in the first place. It's because Temporal accepts and it embraces the reality that software systems have different pieces and those pieces break, and you have to be able to recover from them. Don't stick your head in the sand and pretend your system's going to be perfect and nothing should go wrong, because why should it? Why would it? Because I've tested it in dev. The truth is that in production things do break. But Temporal embraces that, and it says, yeah, that's a reality. Things will break, but we're going to give you a mechanism to come in and restart that and to, fix up your problems as they occur. And, we've had great results with that, and I'll probably touch on some of those in a minute. Observability, this is an interesting one. So many different ways of talking about this, but I guess as we've moved into these modern architectures where we split our monoliths into these, in some cases, hundreds of microservices, we quickly discovered that we couldn't figure out what was happening anymore. I mean, as an industry, because we'd have a transaction come in here and it fired off all these things and it went there, and which services is it in now, and did that one complete, and is this on track? So then we discovered, or this giant focus went into this whole concept of observability, and then we layered these products on top like Prometheus and Grafana, and as an industry, and try to track what's going on in our systems, or build better logging and tracing. And, that's good. I'm not against that. And, you've got to probably do that anyway. But the observability you get from Temporal via the Temporal UI, which fundamentally gives you a row which represents that single workflow. And you click on that row, and it's going to give you the state of that workflow, what activity it's up to, what it's done, what data went in and out, etc. But the key difference that I'd point out here is that observability I'm getting from Temporal, I treat as 100% accurate, because it is actually showing me the state of the transaction or that workflow. Whereas when I'm looking at a third-party external observability tool, that's a side effect, and it can, and sometimes is actually wrong. So the observability you get from Temporal, when you get that straight out of the box, you haven't had to go off and sort of configure other things and make it work. It's a really great feature, and yeah, it's just something that's really beneficial, and different people can get use out of that. They don't even need to be people that wrote the workflows, can still look in there and understand what's going on, even at a business context level. Recoverability, which fits back into that resilience, and that's this idea again that when things fail, we want to be able to recover. Just a sort of a great anecdote about that is that sometimes, okay, we've got something running in prod, and maybe it fails, and we determine we need to make a code change. Now, you go to your dev environment, you make your code change, you do your unit test, you push it forward to whatever, some sort of acceptance testing environment. You're happy, you deploy this thing into prod, and then, coming from old school, you kind of think, I better go back and check those things that were running in prod and make sure, restart them or do something to them so they now fix themselves. You go in looking for them and they're not there. They're not there because they've already been recovered, processed, and they're complete. That's if you have set something to be on effectively some sort of infinite retry. And that's one of those rare moments in IT support where you kind of go, that was a nice surprise, rather than, the bad surprises that we often get. Composability sort of fits back in with the architectural aspects, in that Temporal will encourage you to build to define your workflow, and then to have these individual activities, which of course gives us the great benefit that then we can pull these activities out, maybe add a couple more in, resequence them, And all of a sudden, we've got a new workflow, and maybe that's going to deliver a business function for you. And we've done that a couple of times at Dubber really successfully. We're lucky in that for many of our activities, we use a consistent input and output structure, which allows us to make them composable. But that's been really beneficial. I mean, security, obviously, that's paramount given the data we're working with. But Temporal satisfies all of our requirements for security. You can look them up. They're all covered on the Dubber website there. Just talking even more about, hands-on Dubber's experience with Temporal. If someone was going to talk to us, how did you find working with Temporal, as a vendor, as a product? How is it? Well, overall, it's been great. I'll just give you some concrete information. So the support's been outstanding. So if I'm in the Temporal UI, I can actually just go in there and click on a button to raise a support ticket. And then it pops up and asks me to enter one or two fields. And you raise that and you stick those in, you raise your ticket, and then I'm getting high quality support quite quickly. Now, that is not the standard experience of raising support tickets. There's all sorts of other things that happen with other vendors. Some of the very biggest vendors are often some of the worst. But in this case, it's a pleasant surprise that the quality of that support is just outstanding. Check-in sessions, this is a really important one. Okay, because when we adopted Temporal, we had a regular session with the Temporal consultants or the architects, and even sometimes they would pull in people that had contributed or written the SDKs, just to help, when you had questions or to give some feedback. And I guess this is a good point to highlight. If Temporal was like, I don't know, a relational database, you'd all be saying, well, we all know how to use a relational database, and it's true. We probably do. But Temporal's sitting in a different space. It's filling a different requirement. And so the way to use this and how they work and what's the best way to do things isn't as obvious as it would be in other circumstances. But we found that, so firstly, I think those sessions are useful, and it really is important, I think, to go back and talk to, experts and to get some information, am I going the right way? Does this make sense under this paradigm? Because it is a different paradigm that maybe you're not as familiar with. The online documents on the web are good, but the Slack is outstanding. That's where the real gold is. So there's a Temporal Slack, and you can get on there. You can post questions, and the people that are building Temporal, supporting Temporal, again, will just give you the information you're after. That's been great. Temporal Cloud, we found it outstanding. We use the cloud. We focus, that allows Yaku and I and the rest of the AI team to focus on AI, not on orchestration of services. Updates have been great. The cloud, like all software as a service, it occasionally gets new updated features. The timeline one that was added relatively recently is a great one. And there's also the history offload one, which I think is there. Overall developer experience. So I'm lucky enough that I get to spend most of my time coding still, and the developer experience is really good. So the online, you've got the source code for Temporal stuff is all available. You can look at that. You've got, when you download the Temporal client locally, it contains a local Temporal server you can start up. There's also the Git pod that runs up a Temporal instance. So all those sorts of friction points or problems that in the real world really do annoy developers when you're trying to get started with something, these guys have done their best to help you out with those things. So overall, the developer experience has been really good. Next, okay. Okay, maybe more questions than answers. Learnings. All right. I guess what I would say is that, you've got to ask yourself these questions, because as I was suggesting before, Temporal is a slightly different pattern or paradigm or a different way of maybe building your system. And then you start, if you consider bringing Temporal in, you might start saying, well, hold on, if Temporal is going to orchestrate all these services, Why do I need some sort of asynchronous event bus like Kafka? Is it so? Then you have to ask yourself, is it a replacement for Kafka? And I mean, my opinion is it's not really, but maybe if we're using Kafka in a very light way, maybe it is. But these are the questions you've got to ask yourself. How would Temporal fit in with my Kafka environment or something like that? The database replacement idea. This is an interesting one. As it turns out, in the AI space at Dubber, we don't really have a database of our I don't know, AI processes that are running. Temporal is the database in some ways of our AI executions. So in some circumstances, you could use Temporal almost as a database replacement. Now, there is a different paradigm that we do not use at Dubber, but other people are investigating it, where that you actually use temporal workflows as a persisted data object within your architecture. So you define a workflow that represents a customer's subscription, and that workflow sort of lives forever. And you do updates to it over time as the customer's subscription changes. So I guess that's something to investigate. That's what I'm getting at. You should think about that aspect. Timeout and retry settings, that's an important one, because one of the reasons that we're so, why Temporal's great is this whole thing around the recovery and timing and detecting timeouts and doing the retries. Temporal have done a great job of satisfying any requirement any reasonable requirement that I think you can invent regarding how you want your thing to behave. Oh, I want it to time out quickly. Oh, I want Rust to not time out ever. Oh, I want it to restart a lot of times, but then stop at this point. So that means there's a whole lot of settings, individual numeric value, named numeric values that can be set. And then it could be complex to look at all those and to figure out, okay, with this combination of settings, will I get the exact behavior that I'm after? Now, they do a pretty good job on the docs to explain it, but nonetheless, I would recommend go and talk to Temporal, get on that Slack and just say, hey, this is what I was trying to achieve. Are these the best settings to achieve that? Auto scaling. So we're using Kubernetes to scale out when we get heavy load. And traditionally in Kubernetes, you would scale on CPU or memory. But I think in this case, we actually want to be scaling out on the depth of how much work is waiting to happen on that temporal queue. So we moved to that pattern. Workflow recovery. So they have this saying in Temporal that activities fail, but workflows don't. But if you did want to restart a workflow or re-trigger a workflow or start it again from a different place, there are a number of mechanisms to do that. Is it sort of a retry or a signal and restart? And I think it's worthwhile investigating that and understanding that, and obviously documenting which of those processes fits with your architecture. Because fundamentally, that's why we want to use a tool like this, because it gives us this really seamless recovery. The limitations of the history. So with Temporal, it maintains a history of all the workflows it executed. But sometimes if you've got and you can query that history. So via the UI, we can in our case say, show me all the jobs that did a transcription of an audio file in Spanish in a particular region at a particular point in time. Now, because we want to look at those and figure out do they need to be rerun or investigate them? But there's limitations to what I can put in that query. There's this concept of you can add custom search attributes. So I guess I'll just say look into that. So make sure you understand what the limitations are if you did want to query and extract out workflows satisfying a certain criteria. Versioning is a big one, and I've left it to the end. I'm lucky enough. So I guess what I'd say is that when we think about what temporal is, this durable execution of a workflow, it sounds great, but then you start thinking about, okay, hold on, what happens if I change the code of the workflow when there's some workflows that are half done? And that's when this problem starts arising around versioning. And it's a valid thing to consider, and Temporal has various features to assist with that. We're lucky enough at Dubber that we're able to effectively just sort of restart any workflows that are impacted via versioning change. Okay, if that's not opinionated enough, this is it. This is putting it all out there. This is absolutely my take on this. So, feel free to disagree, but I think when I'm watching a presentation, I'd rather someone just tells me what they think. Give us the lowdown. So, firstly, the philosophy. I like the philosophy of the durable transaction. This workflow idea. Now, whether that's temporal or you find something else to do it, I think this is a great way to do it. I buy into it. Looking historically back through so many projects I've done, what often happens is you start building bits of this yourself in different ways, but you never do it quite right. Um, so, because you end up on large scale projects, you end up needing many of these features, but then you end up sort of coding it yourself. But of course, if you use a product that was purpose built and designed for this, you're going to get a far better outcome than you hand rolling a little piece of it yourself. But of course, you're not going to hand roll all of those other aspects that you automatically get. So I'm a big believer in the philosophy. I think it's a great idea. The workflow specification abstraction. Three long words. What am I saying? Well, when we define a workflow in Temporal, I could open one up, but it's effectively a source code. Whatever language I happen to be coding in this case, it's going to be Go. I'm going to open up a file and it's Go source code, which of course I like because I'm a Go coder. And I can see it says run this activity, run that activity. If this happens, do this. So that's how they've abstracted the concept of the workflow. And I think they got it right. I've used many tools in the past that were called workflows, but they were sort of sitting in a different space in some ways. But what they often did, they went for some sort of graphical representation where you drag these things around a screen. And that's obviously just generally a nightmare. You never have the power that you're after. And the other one they often go for, we used to go for stuff that was XML based. What a nightmare that was. And now putting it in JSON or YAML, I don't think it's much better. So for me, I think they got it right, the correct level of abstraction of the workflow definition. Temporal cloud, I think I've said it enough. We're a fan of that. It's worked really well for us. Architectural foundation product. This is, I think, a very interesting one. Because if you're going to pull something like Temporal into your architecture and you're not currently using it, you've got to realize that this is a foundation product. This isn't this little thing floating off the edge. This guy's going to be orchestrating, it's kind of like a base layer of your system. So you have to perform your due diligence and be confident that it's going to work. I mean, I can't see why it won't work, but I'm just saying prepare yourself because people are going to be asking you a lot of questions about this because it's something that's foundational to how you build your architecture. Founders are involved. How do I know? Because one came to the Sydney meetup and the other one answers half of my questions on the Slack channel. So that's just wonderful to see. And I think the product just keeps getting better. Yeah, and as we say there, the product is growing rapidly. And I'd also say that this space is also growing. It's getting more credibility and others are trying to copy, it appears. I think that's the end of my slides.
Matt, thank you so much for that. It was, I like your last slide. It was a little bit of a love letter. Thank you. I like philosophies that are a bit of a love letter. There was a bunch of questions. And by the way, yeah, y'all, I kind of find it, dude, I'm sorry, but I still kind of find it amazing that Max is that active within the Slack channel. He referenced one of our founders being active. I think he responds more than almost anybody, right? How many interactions have you had with Max at this point, Matt?
Oh, certainly a handful.
Yeah.
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 And high quality too, proper answers.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the dude is just into it. He's lived this problem himself and he wants to solve it, I think is one of those things. So there's a bunch of questions, guys. I'm actually I'm gonna combine two of them, just as kind of just to kind of shorten a little bit of this. You guys talked about choosing Temporal. It was 2 years ago or something. I think you started using it, Matt. You had also talked at one point about, it's not one of these tools where it's a drag and drop and it's not code creation. You're writing code, right? So you kind of talked to a couple of different things that were reasons why you chose Temporal. Was there anything else in your rubric around kind of choosing, or were you looking at other tools at the time when you chose Temporal?
I can sort of speak to that because I did the original consideration map, and
Yeah.
I don't know exactly what you want to call it, but basically a little bit of context. Where we were at Notive, we were using Factory. So that was a tool that came out of Sidekick for any Ruby programmers. And it's basically a very primitive version of what Temporal does. And so we already kind of liked this pattern of orchestration. And we started looking into, okay, let's decompose the fundamental problem of what we're actually trying to do here. So we want to take an audio input and produce a set of AI artifacts out the other side of that. And there's a sequence of things that need to happen to that.
Mm-hmm.
So it very naturally lends itself to this concept of a workflow that happens in a sequence of steps. Okay, so that's one requirement. We kind of thought from the beginning we'd probably want some sort of workflow type thing. And then it comes down to all the ilities. So, observability, reliability, scalability, recoverability. The things that Temporal makes easy for us. And we did try out things like Airflow, and there were particular issues we had with Airflow where it wasn't working that well for us. So there were in Python, there's a number of these tools that do this DAG style workflow orchestration. And yeah, we tried a bunch of them, and we tried out Temporal, and we had much better success with Temporal.
Yeah. It's interesting to see the same sort of thing. One of the things you mentioned, though, Yaku, was the concept of having, like a set of process and steps and everything, and kind of, is it going to fit that mode of what you had? I think at one point in the conversation, this is actually asked twice in both the chat and the QA. One of you had mentioned something about having a workflow with only one activity. Why? What's the value of Temporal in that context?
So basically, the single activity workflows mainly came from the strangler fig type pattern. So we've got an existing thing that using RabbitMQ that is servicing Dubber's AI needs, and the people who are interacting with that want to interact with it like it's a REST service. And so they want to talk to it, have one thing happen, and get a callback. So because of that, the simplest replacement that we came up with in the short term is having this single workflow, and then the sort of longer term solution to it overall is having three, or like taking some of those single activity workflows and stitching them together into, it's just part of our journey of going from like the old way of doing it to the Temporal way.
I think it's just one of those things where it's flexible enough to do that, so that it's going to fit those certain patterns that you have. I find it to be used. Sometimes people use a single workflow, single activity as like a long running workflow to do something. Like there's a bunch of different patterns, and there's lots of discussion about that. If anybody wants to engage within community Slack, plenty of conversations around that. We're happy to talk more about that. Interesting question here too, guys. And I've thought a lot about this too as well. Certain inferences like generative AI are more costly than others. Certain data sets are more costly to kind of deal with. Are you using Temporal in any way to help prioritize or create some sort of fairness like strategy or allotment of machines to workloads and that sort of stuff? GPUs are expensive, right? So can you run certain things in certain places, yet other things? Are you guys using Temporal to help with that?
Yeah, we use that in two ways. Maybe three. What we do is we have our activity task queues, and we allot those to based on like the resource requirements of that particular type of job. So some things are just like a REST call, like maybe transcription. We might outsource that, and that's a REST call that we would then do. And that doesn't require very much resources at all. So we have a task queue that's like, okay, they're voice type activities that are not taking up much resources. And then we have like the task queue for, okay, these stuff need GPUs. And then even in those cases, we might choose to host the GPU type workloads using like a server type infrastructure. So you might think of text generation inference or VLLM, the like specialized LLM hosting tools. So you host it with that, and then Temporal is doing the activity calls and providing the resilience of the actual workflow completing. So yeah, it's not always that everything is hosted as an activity. You can host things as REST or gRPC servers as well, and then have your temporal activities connecting to those. And then the retry classes is also one that Matt mentioned earlier, where it really is quite beneficial to us to be like, okay, if we're doing something that's very expensive and taking up a lot of resources, we don't want to keep hammering that piece of our infrastructure because it's going to cost us a lot of money. Rather, slow down a little bit, retry less frequently. Maybe you have a maximum number of retries before it requires human intervention. So it allows you to build in those stops more easily.
Yeah, and you're coding for it. I mean, as Matt was saying, like kind of this idiomatic language support where as a developer, you're kind of making sure that happens, I think is one of those things. It's not like it's a separate tool, which is kind of one of those, I think people, once people see it, they get it. They're like, oh, wow, that's pretty powerful. So it's all part and parcel of the development process, which I think is the key part there, right? Like, because you do understand what those things are. It isn't like some other thing you have to go off and configure, but it comes back to the point of like, and somebody had asked, I thank you for this question, whoever asked it, but there's a lot of frameworks that are out there that have been around for a couple of years. And I think they're all trying to claim like, I'm an ML service or I'm an AI service or whatever. Like I don't know, it's data flow ultimately, guys. I mean, if it's AI or it's whatever, your order management, it's still the flow of data, right? Interesting enough. What is it about durable execution in the context of AI and ML that you guys feel is unique in terms of the power that it gives you? And it's kind of a little bit of a out there question, but I've thought a lot about this. I published a blog post Tuesday on some of my thoughts around this, but like, what are some of the things you guys think about? Why is it advantageous to use durable or like durable execution and temporal? I love how I use both at the same time in the context of explicitly AI and ML.
All right. Well, I might pass to Matt so I don't answer all the questions. See what he has to say.
Well, I think the key one is that some of those activities are expensive and they take a long time. And when we consider how we replay or if something fails, it allows us to replay from a point in time or from a particular activity. So that aspect is quite powerful rather than having to brute force do something all the way through again.
Yeah, I think there's a fair amount of them. It's interesting. So one of my salespeople came to me and they said, "Hey Jim, like, what's with this? Like, what is temporal for UI or for AI?" And I go, "I don't know. What's temporal for order management?" You're still doing a lot of the same things, and a lot of the same promises are still the same promises. Go on, Yaku.
Yeah, just to add to that, like framing our job as doing AI is incorrect. Like our job is to deliver value to the customer.
That's right.
So it's kind of similar to like, what Steve Jobs would say is like, you don't want to start with the technical problem, start with like the business outcome you're trying to achieve. And that's what we've done. That's why we ended up with Temporal, because we went, we have to guarantee that somebody puts audio into this, they're going to get the AI pieces we're promising them out the other end. And Temporal lets us do that in a way that we trust, basically. That's why we went for Temporal.
Yeah. And it's a great response, Yaku. And I think start with the business, honestly, you guys. Like, cool tech is cool tech. And it's funny. We fight that a little bit here because it's actually some really cool technology. And so if you look at our website, we start with kind of what the thing is, but we get to kind of, okay, why is this valuable to people? And you all talk about it more than we do. So thank you so much for doing that, you guys. I just want to get like two more questions. I know we're like super longer than a half hour, but that's cool. I like Matt's, love letter. I'll let him talk all day long about it. So anyway, Matt, you did talk in something about, how you guys aren't really concerned. I mean, versioning is something you kind of think about, but also your workflows are not super sensitive to versioning. How much do you work on maintaining kind of backward compatibility between versions of workflows? And then, do you use the guidance that we have from Temporal and that sort of stuff?
We've been lucky enough that we haven't had to, I guess, face a lot of the complexities that can come out in the versioning aspects. I think that's one of the most difficult parts of the durable workflow execution concept. It's dealing with that versioning.
Yeah, I guess I'd just add there. We found like this a simple enough solution is we generally have like a backlog of jobs starting, and then we have a set number of jobs running. And if the scale is small enough, then let's say one or two jobs get stuck because of the version transition. Most of the time, like the workflow changes don't get anything stuck, but then we just reset the 3 or 4 workflows that did have an issue. And we compared, like we did go down the path of creating separate workflow task queues. So you have like your active, passive, and it added a lot of complexity to our DevOps architecture. And so we stepped back from that. But Temporal has since then come out with a new versioning approach, which we haven't. It's just honestly not been a big enough problem that we've invested time into it. It will happen at some point, but we have bigger fish to fry most of the time.
Yeah, well, I tell you, it is definitely a problem for many people. I think you guys are unique in it. Well, you aren't really unique. I mean, there's a fair amount of people that don't have this as a massive problem, but there are many who do have that as a massive problem. If anybody is on the call and they actually want to learn more, again, go to the Slack channel, go check out, do the Ask AI assistant in our docs. Like, you guys, would be amazing how many people are just using Ask AI in our docs right now. It's kind of nutso. This stuff is for real. It's powerful. Like, I'm a believer in all the things you all are doing and across this board and all these things. I'm just happy that Temporal has a play in this and that we're helping you deliver real value, as Yaku said. So thank you guys for everything that you do. And thank you both for doing this today or tomorrow. It's tomorrow for you. It's today for me. I just, come on, I had to play the joke at some point. I'm a dad. It's a dad joke. Come on, right?
Love it.
Yeah. So thank you guys so much. I appreciate it. From all of us here at Temporal and on behalf of everybody in the audience, I know, taking an hour out of your day to do this and preparing and all that, it's a fair amount. So we really, really do appreciate it, guys. So with that, thanks everybody for joining today. We'll get a recording out to you. Any parting words, guys? How about a goodbye to everybody together? How do you say goodbye in Australia? Goodbye, right?
Catch you later, mate.
There we go. See you guys. Bye now.
Bye.